Hello, people of TikTok. Welcome back to part 3 of the Lower Canada Rebellions of 1837 and 1838. When we last left off on our last video, we had gotten to the point where the Patriots, who were the primarily French-speaking people in Lower Canada, what is now Quebec, had tried to make some changes within their government that was run primarily by the English, the British Crown, as well as a lot of influence from rich merchants, some of whom were Francophone, but the majority of whom were Anglophone. So it got to the point where the Patriots, who controlled the vast majority of the lower assembly, were trying to cause some difficulties for the British Crown, withholding funds, etc. And things were just getting to a point where everybody could pretty much see something was going to happen. That was where we left off on part 2. So we're going to pick up on part 3. So basically, the British saw that there were some problems coming, and they decided that they were going to, excuse me, arrest the Patriots and the Patriot leaders. Now, this is taking place primarily in the urban centers, which would be Quebec City and Montreal. But remember, this is 1837, so we're not talking about cities like we have today, and we're certainly not talking about a countryside that is really well developed. So the Patriots leaders, led by Louis Joseph Papineau, they fled into the countryside where it was a lot easier to hide. And the British decided they were going to go after them and find them in an attempt to arrest them and stop what was becoming a growing problem. So the soldiers, some of whom were local soldiers, some of whom were British regulars, headed out into the countryside to try to find Louis Joseph Papineau and his leaders. And on November 23rd, 1837, there was a small skirmish between a group of patriots at a village called Saint Denis and the British regulars. And the British regulars were not terribly well prepared for what happened. And the Patriots actually won what would be considered a small victory, holding off the British at that point. But it wasn't to last. A couple days later, on the 25th, another village called St. Charles, the British Army and the regulars were far more organized and much better prepared, and they pretty much routed the Patriots. Things continued like they were for a short period of time, and then here comes my cat. I guess she likes Canadian history as well. On December 14th, December 14th, the British soldiers gained a solid victory against the Patriots, defeated them, and then, as soldiers tended to do in these days, they looted, they pillaged, they burned villages to the ground. They were not very good, not very nice. Excuse me, to what was going to the people, local people in the countryside. The leaders fled. Where did they flee to? Of course, where all people who wanted to overthrow the British government in North America fled to the United States. So that was the end of the rebellion, the 1837 portion of the rebellion. The British brought in a young governor named Lord Durham, whose job was to figure out what was going on in both 1830s or in both colonies, Upper and Lower Canada, the rebellions of 1837, and to make some recommendations. And he discovered some of the problems that were going on, and he recognized some changes that the Crown should make, and he made recommendations as such. And as often happens, the British Parliament and the people in charge in England, they didn't like what they were being told, so they said no. And somewhat unexpectedly, Lord Durham resigned, as he was not happy with the way in which the Parliament was dealing with these problems, and they weren't listening to what he had to say, so he resigned. Papineau got wind of this. This is now by November 1838, so a year after the original rebellions. Papineau returned and tried to launch a second rebellion in November of 1838 after Durham had left, but it was as successful as the previous one was, and it was put down very quickly. And shortly after that, the rebellion was pretty much over. A lot of patriots were arrested, put on trial. Many were executed for their crimes. And the rebellion was over. However, there are some really, really key consequences of the rebellion that are really important to Canadian history, not only for this time period of Canadian history, but really right into the present day. The first one of that is the Patriots, who originally had a fair amount of support from the Francophone people, including some of the merchants and some of the wealthier people, as a result of resorting to violence more than once, were marginalized and no longer had a great deal of support among the Francophone population. And there was no way that a rebellion or any kind of takeover was ever going to happen without the general population. So that was a really, really important one. Second really important consequence of these rebellions was it actually forced the British to change. They finally realized, after looking at what happened in 1837 and then in both colonies, and then in 1838 again in Lower Canada, as a result of Lord Durham's report, they recognized that they had to make some changes. So they actually decided to combine those two provinces, Lower and Upper Canada, into one province, United Province of Canada, in the early 1840s. They had one legislature, equal representation from Canada West, which we would now look at as being Ontario, Canada East, which is Quebec, Upper Lower Canada, respectively. And they attempted to provide some degree of what we're going to call a responsible government, meaning that the governor and his executive and legislative councils were required to listen to some degree to what was being said by the people in the lower house who were elected. Of course, this was not universal suffrage. Women, of course, did not have the vote. I'm not certain. I don't believe people who now own property had the vote, and certainly Indigenous people did not have a vote. But the people who were in the legislatures were elected in like a limited democracy. So that was the point number two. And then point number three, which I think maybe is one of the most important points to consider, is this United Province of Canada brought Francophone and Anglophone leaders together to work together. Now, it wasn't always the most effective, and there were an awful lot of challenges, and it actually, during the history of the United Province of Canada, up until 1867, there was a lot of gridlock where Francophone members wanted certain things and Anglophone members wanted certain things. But it brought about this precedence of the French and the English working together within the colony and beginning to form just the tiny, tiny seeds, perhaps, of something else. This was the Act of Union in 1840 and 1841 that brought all this together. And a mere 27 years later, in 1867, this one colony, the two parts, Canada West, Canada East, ended up convincing two other colonies, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, to join them in Confederation on July 1st, 1867, to create the new country of, and of course, one of the greatest countries in the world, the country of Canada. So while these rebellions were not successful in the traditional sense of the term, if you were to compare them to the French Revolution or to the American Revolution, to the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, etc., they were rebellions, not revolutions. But they did bring about change, and they were a catalyst for change, and they were a catalyst for change that ended up in the creation of a country that has in its historical myths and its creation myths the idea of working together and looking past differences to come to a common form, as opposed to an armed, militarized rebellion or revolution, or whatever you want to call it. So it laid the foundation for the country that we live in now, and the wonderful life and excellent opportunities that we have today. So that's it. Those are the rebellions of Lower Canada in three parts, because it was too long to do all in one. And as well, I had done something on the rebellion in Upper Canada a little while ago. You can go back and review that video. I mean, it's really kind of funny, because honestly, what did you think was going to happen if you launched a rebellion from a tavern? But anyway, that's it for that. Next video will most likely be a couple videos. I think I'll have to break them up, talking about the political spectrum, left, right, center, some of the historical precedents behind it, and then just really what it means in today's day and age in terms of politics. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed that. Please share. Please leave your comments down in the comment section. I would love to hear them. Please let everybody know who might be interested remotely in a little bit of Canadian history and some other history down the line, to check out this TikTok account. And in the meantime, I hope you continue to stay interested, keep reading, and keep learning.